Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast number 5. So, we have some changes here on the show. One is a new microphone and a new camera. It's the Logitech C920, so my voice sounds a little bit deeper, and hopefully the video is sharper with the new webcam. And you'll notice it's widescreen. I didn't realize the camera I was using prior to this was not widescreen and had the little black box area fillers on the side. So we can have a larger image here of what's happening in the Safety Doc's little studio. I'm recording this at 720, and I'm not doing the full 1080 just because I think it makes me look too far away. And hey, you want to be close up here with the Safety Doc. I am going to be adding a Blue Yeti microphone soon, and also the CPU is going through a number of updates, including new video cards, a new motherboard, and just it's going to have better production. So we're going to keep increasing the technical quality of the show. Now we just got to increase the quality of the host guy, right? This guy right here. I'm trying to do that. Make the show better and more relevant for you. Let's take a look in the background. First of all, I do have a new addition back there. For those of you listening on SoundCloud and, of course, on the 405 Media, I'm just going to describe it. I do have a 20-inch by 30-inch sign that was made, and it has 4 images on it. One is the Safety Doc, one is the 405 Media ISS 24/7, and then also Sprigeo. So we have the Safety Doc, and then we have the supporters of the show. So that sign is in the background, of course, with the Wisconsin Badgers. And there is an image back there of me in 4 different color schemes. And actually, that was done by an alternative school student for me back about 9 years ago. Just had done that and given it to me. Very nice. And I'm going to probably move things around a little bit in the background until I get them all kind of settled. But you can notice that we do have some changes here. My voice, I think, sounds a little deeper with the current mic, and then we'll see what happens here with the Blue Yeti once that arrives. But anyway, we have a terrific show for today. I'm going to focus on a term called leakage detection, and it involves basically the residue, what's out there, how to identify attacks, school threats, things to that nature ahead of time before sentinel events occur. And I'm going to talk toward the end of our podcast about a public service announcement that was put out. It's called Evan, and it was through, I believe, a coalition of Sandy Hook families, and it's really well done, and it focuses on the signs of someone, or a student that might be contemplating harm to self or harm to others, but it's very subtle the first time through when you watch the video, and then afterwards when it's pointed out to you where those specific indicators are. It really brings to light what I call sense making, which is a framework used by Carl Weick's. So it's basically noticing the changes from the everyday routine, the changes from the flux. So it's very well done. And I worked this summer with David Obst, who is a movie producer, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and I was helping him to write and then direct a school intruder film. And it was fascinating for me to watch the Sandy Hook PSA, which is about 3 minutes long, because I was able to kind of look at the entire the layout of what was going on. It was just how I was trained by David. So I did start to see what they were trying to accomplish there right away. But it is something you have to train your mind to look for those types of things. And that's where I don't think we do enough in schools, is training students to identify what is different from the everyday happenings, a change in the flux, and then also the threat input system of how to report that, then going into the threat assessment system. And those just are not very cohesive. So I go back and reflect on the podcast that we had last week, podcast number 4 with Scott Myers out of ISS 24/7. Look, and they do large venue security and large venue incident management. An incredible company system, and Scott was able to share just how advanced they've become, with the apps and their notifications of various subgroups to respond to, if it's an NFL stadium with 80,000 people and somebody's having chest pains, how everything is video documented, timestamped, things like that. And yet that is so far advanced from most of the school systems that I personally see when I work with schools that still use models for example, threat input of tell an adult, and models such as just, documentation of writing some notes down on a yellow notepad and things like that, and not time stamping and things like that. So we had great feedback here on the show from ISS 24/7 and the presentation that Scott gave. What I thought about a lot after that show was, when we go to large venue events, sporting events, arenas, things like that, you notice security that's overt. When you walk through and you're being checked if you have anything on you, but you don't notice all the stuff that goes on in the background to keep the venue safe. And I think that's evidence just of how effective ISS 24/7 as the leading model is, and that it's so effective you don't even notice how good it is, and that is just that's an accolade to ISS 24/7. It's not something that you're going to leave and be thinking about the whole time of that entire blanket of safety that was encompassing that stadium or venue, but it was there and it was redundant, and again, a very good system, and I was glad Scott talked about that. Looking ahead to next week, I'll be doing an interview with Jennifer Fritton, and Jennifer has a rescue dog. She will talk about, first of all, delineating what is a rescue dog, what is a therapy dog, what is a comfort dog, what is a guide dog. But in her capacity with her rescue dog, she is contacted at times. Here's an example just recently to go out and I believe a 4-year-old boy with autism was missing, wandered from his residence. So then she was contacted and joined with her group, and then they went out and looked for this child and did find the child and returned the child. But there are you have all of these different terms: guide dog, comfort dog, rescue dog. But we'll talk really about what a rescue dog is. And from a school perspective, I want to talk a little bit too about what Jennifer and I, when we talked about doing this interview, she said there are people who also self-dispatch. So they hear that somebody might be lost, and then they report to that scene, and really that needs to go through the authorities. But Jennifer will have, I think, just some incredible insight into what it is to be a trainer, what it is to be on call, 24/7 with a rescue dog, and realistically what the expectations are, and typically then what a rescue dog does. I mean, most of us might think if a building collapses, a rescue dog is there trying to find anybody who might still be in the building, which, yeah, it could happen, but more often than not, it's the scenarios like I talked about where somebody maybe with dementia or somebody with autism wanders from a residence and then needs to be located. So that will be next week with Jennifer. That will be a live interview where I will bring the Canon camcorder that I purchased about 6 months ago and do that. And so we'll have that as a live on-site interview. That is an interesting camcorder. It's HFR 700. And I read the reviews on it before I bought it. It had just come out. It was an upgrade of a previous model. And I mean, it wasn't that expensive, but, it sounded really, really great. And I don't have a lot of experience with camcorders because I didn't have a camcorder. The last camcorder I remember was back in the 1980s that came in literally a suitcase. My parents had bought a camcorder. And I think it was for my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And this thing today it'd be comparable today to what you would see television, reporters and the crews carrying. I mean, it was that big. This thing was a monster. And it had great audio, but the video was absolutely horrible on this thing. And I do have a couple videos up on YouTube. I was coaching basketball back in it would have been right around, late 1980s, very early 1990s. And my mom would come to the games and record them. And a couple of the championship games, which we won, I should say the team I coached won. My mom had videotaped the games, and even with the best enhancement software I actually had somebody professionally convert it from the VHS onto DVD, and he said, I did all of these things and whatever. This is like the best I can get it. But he said the odd thing is like the audio is awesome, and it is. It's like perfect, but yeah, but it is what it is. So, but yeah, it's just a typical handheld camcorder, my new one. And I've used it. I do set up differently in here. I also teach college classes. So I have a fireplace over there, and I'll set up what's called fireside chats, where then every week I'll do kind of an update on the course and talk about some of the things that have evolved during the week, some of the student comments, things like that. And I also, once in a while, we'll do some of those things like at different locations outside or whatever. But I took this thing on vacation this summer, and the thing is the screen, so it doesn't have a viewfinder, it has the 3-inch LCD screen on it, and it's like a mirror. I mean, any amount of sun and it just completely just washes it out. I mean, it's like you're just looking at this glassy reflection, and yet like nowhere in the reviews or the people who have bought this and then they write up about it and things like that. I mean, it's rated pretty high. I mean, some people say like, oh, the video is kind of great. Well, I mean, whatever. I mean, people say that about everything, but like the thing that stands out to me is like you couldn't see. I mean, you're taking your best guess. You're aiming this thing in a direction. I mean, and you can buy these little hoods that they sell to go over it. But this is like a known issue, so I actually researched this. And I'm thinking, first of all, like how is Canon and Sony and how is there not a solution for this? Besides having to buy this aftermarket hood that you assemble to go over this thing, which then doubles the size of the camcorder. It's kind of goofy. But it wasn't in the reviews. I mean, I wouldn't have bought it if like a couple people would have said, hey, it's a great camcorder, but like it's like looking in a mirror where the sun is aimed at the mirror and shining back at your face. I mean, it's just it's just crazy. So I do have some interesting video I took this summer. My dad and I did a father-son trip up to Superior. I'm going to talk about that a little bit here in the intro. And I took a lot of video with it. One of the scenes we went to Hibbing, Minnesota, where they have a massive open pit iron mine. And I think it's one of the biggest in the world, and it was, like a significant source of iron for military manufacturing during World War II. So we were there on a day, so this would have been in late June of this past summer, and beautiful day, beautiful day. And we were there on a day when they were doing a blast. So, it was probably easily a mile away, but you have this area, there's this like little gift center and things like that. And then there's people who used to work at the mine, and they're there, so they've got cameras set up, and it's a big thing, and Hibbing's not a very big community. So when they have a blast, they really have a blast. Like a lot of people come out, hey, let's have a blast. So I had the camcorder set up in the general direction of where this would be, and it was interesting. They had a plane fly over a couple times, and one of the guys who'd worked there, years ago, said the reason they do that is they make sure that there isn't changes in air pressure, because the blast, instead of going straight up and dissipating, if there was a change in air pressure, it could basically kind of like hit a wall and then be thrown back toward the ground and do damage to equipment, things like that. So that was kind of interesting. A lot of people had fascinating stories. There was a lady next to me who'd worked at the mine, and she was probably like 70 years old, super nice lady, had a really sophisticated camera, like on this tripod, and had this all aimed at. There were little holes in a steel chain link fence. There were these little openings where you could focus out of, so you could see what was going on. And she was next to me, and literally like 2 minutes before the blast, her camera dies, her battery dies, and I have this on my recording, where you can listen. She's like, I can't believe it, like the battery, and she didn't have a spare, and so she gave up her spot because it was pointless at that point. And then I moved my camera and readjusted it, and I have a really neat, I captured it just by chance. I mean, by aiming it in the direction and put it up. And it's funny because it's actually one of my most viewed YouTube clips, and all it is it's about 12 minutes of, just kind of staring out. And I focused in on one of the big trucks loading something, these huge monster dump trucks, tires like 20 feet tall. That's not really an exaggeration. I mean, to get the ore out, but yeah, it seems like a lot of people, capture that. So I probably have like an audience in Hibbing. But yeah, that my dad and I went up to see, or not to see that, we were just up there by chance, and we stopped in Hibbing, and right away somebody said, hey, are you here for the mine blast today? So yeah, you got it. So very interesting if you're ever up there. One, too, is that they moved the entire community away from where the mine was. So because the community was initially built on where the richest iron deposits were. But if you go up there, there are still city streets and sidewalks, and everything else is completely gone near the mine. It's very, very eerie. And they added pictures actually in, so you can see what was there. Like, this used to be a school, this used to be a union hall, and all of these things like were in these locations. But that in itself is fascinating to see, like these foundations, from 100, years ago in this completely abandoned town. And there's still like some street lamps. And it's not like these things are like worn down or anything. It's just, they're still fully intact, and sidewalks and stuff like that, from 100 years ago. So I don't know, just kind of interesting, but yeah, definitely have to have a high level of safety when you work in a job like that. So I want to first of all, I guess I already got in a little bit of that story with my dad, but I want to give a shout out to the supporters here of the Safety Doc podcast. And that would be the 405 Media out of Los Angeles. John and the 405 Media with a very interesting lineup of different shows, ranging from news to introspection to economy, to legal, a lot of perspective, a lot of guests. I'm very happy to be on the 405, 9 o'clock Pacific time, p.m. Monday through Thursday. I encourage you to listen to the 405 and take advantage of all that the 405 has to offer. Personally, I don't subscribe to the what would I guess be the mainstream media anymore. I don't watch the news. I mean, I couldn't even really tell you what time the news is on. Is it 9:30? I don't know. I don't watch it anymore. I don't listen in my car. I listen to podcasts. I download podcasts. Ton of podcasts. I actually had to get a bigger micro SD card. It's amazing. Those things are half the size of your tiny pinky. And just because I download so many podcasts to listen to, which are all informational. It's kind of like a postdoctorate study as I'm driving in my car to and from work, listening to a lot of the people that have shows on the 405, and then also other media shows, such as Stefan Molyneux. Big fan of his presentation. So, but yes, our sponsors, I'm going to say supporters, the 405 Media, ISS 24/7, ISS 24/7 out of Coral Springs, Florida. Scott Myers and his staff keeping people safe at large venues, including about a third of the NFL, NASCAR, Major League Baseball, shopping malls, and just other large venues, NCAA and so forth, continue to rapidly expand. Really second to none. Absolutely an incredible system. In my opinion, needs to be in K-12 public schools for incident management, especially management when you have multiple schools within a district. If you have 70 schools in your district, you'd have the capability of monitoring at a central location the events that are happening at all 70 schools. And that can include, and it's very important nowadays even to include, was there a medical event, was a child had a seizure, allergic reaction, something like that. EMS was called when they called, and that could all just feed into a data system, things like that, or if there was a lockdown or what it could, would be, and timestamp it. And then they have a great analytics piece, which Scott talked about during our previous podcast. So again, I'm gonna be writing up a piece, and I do have some book contracts, and one of the books is going to focus on leakage detection systems, and then also looking at your analytics for safety and safety reflection. There's a process called applied decision analysis, comes from the military, where you go back and you look at an event that happened, like a safety event, and then you play through it step by step, and you're looking not to judge the effectiveness of the decision making, because that makes people defensive. But what you do is you identify where were the points when we could have made different decisions. What decisions were on the table? What were the heuristics, the processes we went through to narrow down those decisions? And that's where you really learn, because people will first, there's a tendency to narrow decisions extremely fast, like to go and, like, here's our 2 options, when really, you probably have 20 options or 30 options, but you narrow those down. You see this all the time too in these mottos of run, hide, fight, things like that for, what do you do in an active shooter situation? Well, I think there's a missing first step to that. And I talked about that when I worked with David when we produced the movie this summer, or when he produced the movie and I was giving content direction and writing with him and directing on it. But the first thing you do, the very first thing you do, is you take that second or two to evaluate your environment. You look around and see what's happening around you, what your context is, because you might be running directly into the path of harm's way, especially in a school, for example, or any interior location. It's hard to identify where a gunshot is coming from, for one, but you might overlook a very, very obvious better option. Let's say that you're 10 feet away from from an exit that could get you, out of the building, and you're 2 feet away from, a room that you could go in and lock yourself in, what's your better option? Well, again, it depends upon what the context is, but you might not even be trained to look and say, hey, I'm standing right by this door. I can just, boom, I can be out of here. And so that's something that the first step should always be to take that second or two to evaluate your surroundings. I remember years ago when I was receiving my firefighter training, and one of the very first things that they taught you was when you get off of the fire engine, before your foot hits the ground, the first thing you do is, you don't pull up and throw the door open and bolt off the vehicle and then do whatever you have to do to get equipment or whatever. But the first thing you do is you look, and for example, is there a down power line? Is there some is there some chemical, whatever? What are you stepping out into? Because there have been firefighters who have stepped onto, a live wire, and so that's missing from these types of systems, is that very first step, which is a couple seconds to assess that environment. So I'm going to take a drink of water here. I don't have pause capability. This does say Gatorade, but it's not. It's just water. One of the things here is it is Wisconsin and it is winter. This is my studio. It is in a basement. It's still not bad for temperature. I do have the fireplace going. It will get really cold down here before long because this is not heated. But what happens is the humidity drops this time of year. So everything dries out, including then, voice and stuff like that. So it's very important to have a hydrated safety dock, because a dehydrated safety dock benefits nobody. But yeah, so, just some kind of stories to get us going there. ISS 24/7. And finally, we have Sprigeo, S-P-R-I-G-E-O, Sprigeo.com. Joe out of Santa Barbara, working very diligently with schools in, I believe, 25 states right now, and growing with bullying reporting software. And he has a strong analytics background that goes with that system. And also, Joe is getting together a number of professionals in the field. He just recently brought together, I believe, 10 of the top middle school principals for a summit just on the issues that are facing middle school students regarding safety, harassment reporting. So that's the way to do it, to have those focus groups, those forums. And ISS 24/7, Scott talked about that too, with his user groups, where they come down the who's who of the business and they talk about what works well in the system, what they'd like to see in the system, kind of brainstorm, but really have that qualitative process. And you can tell that those are the companies that really want to make their service and their product better, because they're not going behind the scenes and then rolling out some update for you that you might not want at all. And you're like, why did you change this? I mean, it was fine. But what they're doing is they're getting that industry input, and they're doing it in that qualitative way, which I think is so important. We don't do enough of that. Also in a school setting, where we survey teachers, if we do that at all, like on safety and culture and things like that. Well, it's one thing to survey. It's one thing to sit down with people and have a discussion, and then to have a qualitative analysis of what was said during that discussion. So again, but thank you to the 405 Media, and please tune into the Safety Doc. You can subscribe. I do have a I have a RSS feed on SoundCloud, and on Twitter it is @SafetyPhD, @SafetyPhD. I have just incredible analytics. I mean, my Twitter impressions, profile visits, things like that have shot through the roof in the last few weeks. And I've gained a number of followers, but please also consider following me @SafetyPhD. And you can do that on Twitter. So getting to some of our anecdotal stories, we were able to get out our Christmas lights last week, and then we had a snow. So we got them out on Saturday and ran the cords to where everything would go, and then it snowed Saturday night. Not a lot, like 4 inches, and it was heavy, and I took my snowblower out, and it really it's chugging along, just barely kicking stuff out and getting clogged up. So it doesn't handle that well. You got to have, we're supposed to get 8 inches of snow Saturday night, and it's going to be like 20 degrees, so it'll have no problem with that, but the slushy stuff, yeah. But I ordered a 150-foot rope light, a red rope light. I had a 50-footer, and I ordered a 150-foot. We have a maple tree in the front, and I kind of swirl it around. It's kind of a neat effect. And it was supposed to arrive like a week ago, and it didn't. So what's happening now is I'm going to be putting this thing up Saturday, and I am having my oldest daughter help me. She is going to be feeding the rope light up to me. I'll be on a ladder working this thing around the tree. But it's going to be like 20 degrees out, and it's going to be a little windy and low humidity, and then that night we get the 8 inches of snow. So I'm thinking, I'm not really looking forward to going out there and doing this. It's going to be that cold out. But I watched this video on modern marvels, and I did that. You can go online and find the modern marvels videos. But it talked about the Alaska highway built during World War II. And some of the workers were saying, it'd be 35 degrees below zero and 40-mile-an-hour winds, and you worked with your bare hands because that was the only way you'd have enough dexterity to, adjust the various nuts and bolts and things on the equipment and whatever. And, you just got used to it. Something, okay, 35, 20 above, it's a 55-degree difference. I can make it work. But I'm like, I don't know. So, in my younger days, this wouldn't have been anything. I would have taken that on and been, yes. Now I'm like, ooh, questioning, does the rope light go out this year or not? Plus the old safety doc climbing up on a ladder, and I'm going to have to really wear my shoes that have the absolute most grip, really be safe when I'm out there doing that. So yes, Modern Marvels will be a new episode. It's going to be the safety doc putting out his 150-foot rope light in 20-degree weather. So that'll probably be released next year. They'll run it back to back with the Alaska highway during World War II. So people will be like, hey, this is just as interesting. Look at this guy putting this rope light up. How's that thing even bending? So I have new software I'm using. I bought Camtasia 9, and I like it. But it's a learning curve. So, for those of you who watch this in YouTube, it seems like obviously the 405 Media is my primary audience. And then there's a number of you who do like to watch this on YouTube, I think, to see, to see someone deliver the content. And then not as many people follow on SoundCloud. So I'm hoping people will do that also, that I'll get more subscribers on SoundCloud. But I will be editing this together, and I did edit a really neat intro and had somebody work with me on that. So that will be with this podcast. So yeah, that's cool. So looking forward to the old Blue Yeti. So going back to this summer of 2016, and my dad and I going up to Superior. So kind of reminds me a little bit of what Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade, when he goes with his dad, Sean Connery. So my dad and I both went to school at UW Superior at different points in time. And we toured the campus. They have a number of new buildings. Actually, that's where I had my camcorder out. I was getting the whole campus scope. I never watched that video, but it's called Enbridge. It's a refinery, a oil gas refinery. It's very, very large. That's why you go to Superior, like the gas price really low. So, and it's off. It's not very easy to find. It's kind of off in one area, but there's a cemetery which is historic because they relocated a Native American cemetery on Wisconsin Point, which is by Lake Superior, about 100 years ago, and then they basically just dumped the remains of these Native Americans at the end of this cemetery, which is terrible. And a lot of them, the remains now are starting to wash into, there's a river behind the cemetery, and then actually the river washes into Lake Superior. So but yeah, and no one is taking responsibility to do anything about this. So I just wanted to see this location. It was with a marker, to see where this was, and we found it. And as we were leaving, we could see this embridge. These monster huge white tanks, which house the fuel and things like that. And my dad said, why don't we drive down there and check that out? And it was a gravel road, and I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm questioning this because I'm guessing there's pretty high security for something like that, but I went along with it. I was driving, and we started to go down, and all of a sudden I passed a side road, and I could see a pickup truck starting to come up this side road toward me. So, my first instinct is, ooh, this isn't good, because there's like one road in. And I start to get closer to this refinery, and there's like a guard post, literally like a military guard post. So bar crossing the road, and there's a little hut type thing, and the security guy comes out, clearly I think he had a rifle. Wasn't aiming it at me or anything, but I think he was. And he comes out, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good. This isn't good. Now I have the camcorder like sitting on the seat, and I think I also had my camera because I wanted to get some pictures of like the signage where this Native American burial had been and things like that. But So I'm thinking, oh, like, are they thinking we're spies? But I'm also here, with my dad, who's 74, whatever it was at the time. So I think, yeah, that's helping me out. And so the guy comes up, I roll down the window, and I'm like, I went to school. My dad and we went to school here, just vacationing, just looking, just seeing what this is. And I'm like, I totally get that we probably crossed a line, although there wasn't any sign that said, like, do not cross this. It wasn't like Area 51 in the desert. And I'm like, just let me turn around and I'm out of here. And the guy's like, yeah, okay, no, that's fine. So, he stands out there the whole time and doing the little maneuver, and I finally, get out of there. And they follow you all the way out, and then, it's fine. But that wasn't a good feeling. So, yeah, one of those right off the bat where I'm like, this is a bad idea. So, but, yeah, kind of laugh at it right now. Looking at school safety and threat detection, leakage detection, I ran, so there's something called a Google Ngram, where you can put in a word or multiple words like school, detection, threat detection. You put a comma after every word or every term you want searched, and it'll show you the prevalence of how these things are appearing in literature. Now, the weird thing with an Ngram is it'll go up to 2008 and then it stops, and I don't know why it hasn't been updated, because it's been that way for a while. But there are certain terms between, like all the way up to 2008. So I did 2000 and 2008. Terms that just completely were flatlining across, like threat assessment wasn't showing up anymore. In literature, the word shooter, the word leakage, the word detection, the word school, those were all like straight lines. The only one that started to make an upward climb was threat detection, meaning that, that is showing up more in literature these days. But words like leakage, which is huge when it comes to identifying the early phases of residue or students who are contemplating harm to self or others, there wasn't anything different in 2008 as far as showing up in prevalence in published works versus 8 years before in 2000. So it's also fascinating. I did a Google search and I typed in school safety in quotes plus leakage detection in quotes, and the first 4 responses to that were all articles that I had written. So it's alarming just how little is out there about this. And I'm like this is me. Like I'm the guy that did the first 4 that showed up here, and then after there weren't many at all. So, but yeah, I mean, really kind of scary stuff. So, leakage detection is talked about in that PSA. I mean, there's many signs typically ahead of time before a student considers, or goes ahead with harming self or bringing harm to a school, such as an active shooter situation. Things such as posts to social media, writing about it, talking about it with other students. There's a definite recruitment factor that tries to go on in a lot of cases, trying to get other students to go along with it. You're much more likely to carry something out if other people are going to be there with you, and they're less likely to back out, and you're less likely to back out if you're doing something as a group. It kind of, again, gets into that mob mentality, which I talked about a little bit. And it also immediately diffuses responsibility for the act, no matter, how, outrageous the act is. It diffuses the responsibility when there's maybe 3, 4, 5 people involved, versus one person involved. I mean, we still see it's mostly one person, but you'll see these attempts. And when you look at, terrorism, for example, I think part of the reason terrorism is effective and effectively in some areas growing with recruitment is, you become one of many, and then that mob mentality, and then also responsibility becomes diffused, and then you have an ideology that you're subscribing to. But so these things are out there. Leakage detection. Just are your peers talking about things like this? Harm to self, harm to others. What are they searching? Are they writing about this? So those types of things where it's very specific, and it's amazing how much of that just gets overlooked on social media. And that was as evidenced in the PSA where, and I won't talk too much about it, because I think you should watch it, but actually the main character in the PSA, which is really then, secondary to the whole thing, is scrolling through his Facebook updates, and one of the updates is this kid showing himself, with pointing a gun at the screen, and he just goes past it. But instead of saying, "Oh my goodness, like look at what he's doing here. I need to let somebody know about this like right now." So what happens? One is we don't teach students first what is the normal, or just like what do you identify every day as the normal? Describe that to me. Put that into words. Find words for that. What is normal? And then what isn't normal? And start to use things. This video is a great tool of them pointing out of like what's normal. I mean, you encounter it every day, but what's different? Okay, it was like this post by this student on social media, where they had a weapon, or this student is saying things, like be better off without me and stuff like that. And it's amazing how much that stuff gets just either overlooked or downplayed. You need, first of all, a thorough threat assessment system in place that has a robust input component. I've worked with schools that have very solid, safety assessment, student assessment teams. And a question I'll ask is, how would a student report this? Like if they knew that their friend was posting on, social media, or that their friend was talking about, if possibly bringing a gun to school or harming others. Well, what our expectation would be that they would tell an adult. Okay, that's narrow. You need more than that, such as Sprigia, which is an anonymous reporting system, and you can branch out from there, but it's tell an adult, and that's not always going to work. So what is your backup system? The other part is, how does a student know that? I asked that. Well, it's in the handbook or something like that. Well, the student, how do you know that they've read the handbook, or did you go through it with them? Well, no, we didn't. And no, we send the handbook home and the parent's expected to go through. If the parent has concerns, this is what they're, and you need to be more specific on that. You need to sit down with students and explicitly say, if this is what you are perceiving, or that you have a concern, then this is what you do. You contact these people. You use this system. You could write an anonymous note and put it here. You immediately tell, your parent or whatever, but you have these means of input. This is what you do. And if you have this gut feeling, follow it. If something doesn't seem right, or if something seems unusual with your friend and you're concerned about your friend, for harm to self or others, or not even your friend but another student, something you're observing, you have that gut feeling, follow it. Don't suppress it, follow it. And I think we have this mode of suppressing, or this mode of calling woof too many times. Well, that's just the way that they are. Well, no, if they made a post last night, and it's sitting there with a shotgun, saying, boy, this would be great to make people dance at school, that's definitely something that immediately needs to be brought to an adult and brought to authorities. And if you're the adult in this case and someone is bringing that to you, you look at that information, immediately invoke whatever your threat assessment system is at your school. And your threat assessment system might say, at step one, once, if you look at it and here's this overt threat to harm, then immediately we call our school police liaison officer and the police, and they take over at that point with the student, and you have somebody immediately assigned who's with that student, or you get that student separated away from their locker or whatever. But you have those flow charts that work through that. And that's something, again, threat assessment systems are very inconsistent in schools of what's a threat and what isn't a threat. And how are you documenting that? Who's doing the interview? What questions are you asking? Is a motivational interview approach, is it standardized? Are you recording that? Are you then also having a procedure that does follow-up, such as looking through some of the students' materials, making sure that they contacting the parent immediately? Do they have access to weapons in the home? Things like that. And these things need to happen, and they don't always happen. There is a program, Salem Kaiser. I think I might have talked about this before, which you can purchase, and there's a number, and you can organically create these things too. I would, they're not hard to find, but these leakage detection, teaching leakage detection for one, but then having that threat assessment component to go with it. And then identifying your student, assistant team, whether that is, your counselor, social worker, psychologist, could be principal, school police liaison officer, and whoever, and then getting together to work with that student, identifying what the needs are, is the possible, depression, and then who are your connections in your greater community, greater, county resources that you can help the family get connected with. And something that will help that is, it's called a community health needs assessment, or the China required under the Affordable Care Act. And that will have a measurement by hospitals of community needs. And then usually they're school representatives, and if they're not, school representatives should fight for their place at that table for those discussions. On, if we have students or families and we are feeling that there could be these risk factors, how do we make these connections then with the counselors at the hospitals and the physicians and the care providers who can jump in and to do a very thorough analysis for threat to harm to self or others. Schools will sometimes do things called, or they'll do surveys like called Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which sometime I'll just talk about in full. But that is not a good means to assess whether a student has a mental health concern or not. It's not designed for that. It's very tricky to do things like that. So I'll talk about how to, at some point, how to formally get into that. Maybe I'll do that through an interview with someone who specializes in that. But that community health needs assessment, you can type in your county or parish or whatever it is where you live, your local hospitals, and they're all doing this. This has been done the last few years under the Affordable Care Act, and these documents will come up, and they're usually very elaborate, and they'll give you this profile of the needs of the community, including the students, and then also there's goals and how to the people and how to connect with the resources to get students the help that they need related to counseling and also with families, and instead of letting those things just go on and just go on. So school connectedness is huge. The CDC in 2009 produced a report on school connectedness, still relevant today. I've talked about this a number of times, but getting kids connected to school and getting kids connected to kids, you're going to identify then those changes that changes the flux in the system. So what's different from the everyday? You're going to have those bonds with students. Students have bonds with other students. School culture is probably your number one preventive measure when it comes to harm, to the harm to self or harm to school, and that has been proven in the school connectedness report. So a few other things. One is, I don't think we do, I know we don't do enough focus groups. We talked about ISS 24/7 last week, and Scott talking about how they get their users down and they do the focus groups. And what needs to happen is we need to get kids together to talk about what is making the school safe. When do you not feel safe, and how do you identify when you don't feel safe because of what another student might be doing, because of other physical things going on, in the physical environment, maybe around the school, if that's not safe, you don't feel safe walking to school, whatever it might be. But to have those discussions, you will find out so much more from a focus group, and even students themselves who feel alienated from school and starting to feel that angry, maybe not having innate needs met, or maybe other psychological things that are manifesting where they're considering harm to self or others and some ideology, to connect them back into a school system where they're having friends and feeling connected and part of teacher. They feel like they have agency and purpose, that school isn't boring. They have they have a task, a job there. They're given rigor. They have a purpose. They're celebrated for their contributions. Now, these aren't all fail-safes, but these are just obvious ideas. You're going to have students bring that information forward to sooner, especially focus groups. You talk about like social media with students. Talk about seventh grade students. You talk about social media. What's happening right now? Well, for bullying, well, tell me. You just let them talk. They'll talk. And what are some of the apps that are kids are you're using right now, and how is bullying and how are threats, and what would happen if you saw this, and do you really know how to report it? What could we do better as a school, or what if you had a friend, and just kind of let them talk through these things, and then just their experiences, and they might say, yeah, I see things like this, but it's so frequent that I don't, we don't do anything about it. I go back to 1997 in Bethel, Alaska. There was a school shooting, and 24 students showed up on a mezzanine, one with a camera, just because they all knew the school shooting was going to happen. No one reported it, and of course one wanted to record it. So leakage detection is absolutely huge, and we need to spend more time specifically upfront teaching students of how to identify what is different in their environment. Watching that PSA from the Sandy Hook, I believe, parents called Evan. You can go online and find it. And if you look at that from a leakage detection standpoint, or sense making, to look at what are the things that are different in the environment, all of a sudden those things are going to pop out at you that are redundant throughout that video. So I really commend that video was assembled. The website is safetotell.org, but it's just absolutely incredible. It has, I hear, over 5.2 million views on YouTube since its publication on Friday, shared thousands of times on Facebook. But it's the thing where it raises awareness of your environment. It raises awareness of the environment. The video was put out by Sandy Hook Promise, a nonprofit created by people in Newton, Connecticut, in response to the shooting at Sandy Hook School. So, and again, your focus when you're watching this is likely directed away from the key player of the video. And then the second time you watch it, then you can identify really this change from flux of what's going on. But the article here is called "Don't Just Share the New Sandy Hook PSA, Take Action" by Aaron Paul, CUSA, published December 7th, 2016, and it looks like it's the station is www.9news.com, where I was able to get this article from. But again, Aaron Paul, KUSA, did this article about the Sandy Hook PSA. So I want to thank you for listening to this podcast number 5. So next week we will be looking forward to Jennifer Fritton talking about her experience working as a rescue dog professional, her responses to those, and then we're going to get into also the issues that come with that, of the self-dispatch, the people who aren't part of a formal organization but just kind of show up anyway because they pick it up on the scanner, and to differentiate out of what a service dog is versus a rescue dog, guide dog, comfort animal, and it's very delineated. And I think those are very important safety things to do, to know that, because there can be a workaround sometimes where people will go directly to these organizations instead of going through law enforcement to these organizations. And as I'm thinking about these rescues too, and I'm talking to Jennifer, I said, I just interviewed someone from ISS 24/7. What you're talking about would be a complete perfect coupling with ISS 24/7 to know, identify groups, identify locations, timestamp what's going on, and so forth. And when we get into this, just for some curiosity, I said, what's the main thing right away that you look for or ask if something happens? And she said, is there water nearby? Because get people by the water before we arrive, in case someone goes near water. So again, we talked about leakage this week. We talked about this very popular Sandy Hook public service announcement that's out on YouTube called Evan. Please take a look at it. And for the Safety Doc, I want to thank you again for tuning in this week. Stay safe. Continue to experience our positive growth here in our changes. Subscribe at SafetyPhD. Take care of yourself, and think about me as I'm hanging those rope lights and trying to keep my fingers from getting frostbite here the next few days. So take care. Thank you. Take care. Thank you.